In 2376, the Alpha Quadrant was still early in the process of healing from the devastation of the Dominion War. As part of this effort, the USS Enterprise E, along with the starships Jupiter and Templar, had been sent to re-establish an outpost in the Barisa sector in response to renegade Dominion forces still attacking Federation starships in the area. After completing construction of the outpost and fighting off the Jem'Hadar ships, Enterprise detected a strange temporal distortion, along with a distress call.
This is Captain Thaddeus Deming of the USS Premonition. We are under attack by the BORG. To any ships in the area, this is the USS Premonition.
USS Premonition NX-4612, a registry that is far too low for a ship of this era, was the first and only known ship of the Premonition class. Now, this wasn't just a typical starship. Premonition was a timeship equipped with a temporal drive capable of opening temporal rifts that it or other starships could use to travel through time. Premonition's temporal drive also allowed it to project a temporal stasis field that could slow the progression of time to a near-complete halt around a small area of space, and was equipped with what was called a Gemini device, allowing it to make a temporal duplicate of another vessel temporarily. After Enterprise fought off the Borg spheres, Premonition's captain, Thaddeus Deming, explained that he and his ship were from the future, and he had been sent back to 2376 to warn of an imminent Borg invasion, which began with the loss of Starbase 612. While Captain Picard was initially reluctant to heed Captain Deming's warning due to the Temporal Prime Directive, Deming insisted that the Federation and the entire Alpha Quadrant would fall to the Borg if something wasn't done.
Picard, where I come from, the Federation barely exists. Vulcan, Bajor, Kronos, Earth, they're all assimilated planets. This is our last hope, Captain. If you don't help us, the Alpha Quadrant will fall to the Borg.
Now convinced, Picard notified Starfleet Command and rushed off to Starbase 612 to find that the Borg attack had indeed begun. The base was heavily damaged and multiple ships had been assimilated, but with the assistance of Enterprise, Starbase 612 was able to fight off the remaining Borg attackers. Meanwhile, there was a bunch of other craziness also happening across the quadrant. Toral, the illegitimate son of Duras and last living leader of his house, was trying to overthrow Chancellor Martok and take over the Klingon Empire by claiming he possessed the Sword of Kahless. This, of course, was a lie. Toral's sword was a fake, and the only person who knew the location of the real Sword of Kahless, and could thus disprove his claim, was Ambassador Worf. I know Dax was there too, but for some reason Ezri is never brought up in this. I guess Toral doesn't know how Trill symbionts work. Anyway, Worf was in temporary command of the Defiant-class USS Avenger on his way to Kronos to gather support from the Klingon Empire for the impending Borg invasion when Toral tried to kill him by ambushing his ship in the Icolas Expanse. After evading Toral, Avenger rerouted to pick up the real Sword of Kahless so Chancellor Martok could unite the Klingon Empire in order to face the coming Borg threat. But of course, things couldn't be that simple, because after fighting off Toral's forces, Worf and Martok discovered Toral was being backed by the Romulans. Shocking, I know. So Martok prepared to declare war on the Romulan Star Empire, because no crisis is ever too big to get in the way of Klingon politics. The Federation pushed for peace talks between the two powers that would be mediated by Ambassador Spock, but of course, the Romulans were up to their own schemes. Secretly supporting Toral's coup attempt was just to keep the Klingons and Federation distracted from what they were really after: an Omega molecule. Somehow, a group of Ferengi had managed to find and stabilize one, and were planning to sell it to the Cardassians. I'm not really sure how post-Dominion War Cardassia could afford that, but the Romulans believed that neither side really knew the true value of what they had. And they never would, because a Romulan fleet led by Admiral Sela stole the molecule right out from under them both. This, of course, then attracted the attention of the Borg. After evading them and securing Omega, Sela proposed a deal with the collective. After Toral failed to take over the Klingon Empire, he was proving to be more trouble than he was worth, especially with the Federation now pushing for peace talks. So, Sela convinced the Borg to destroy Toral's remaining forces in exchange for the Omega molecule. This, of course, was a lie. After eliminating Toral's fleet and diminishing their own forces in the process, Sela ambushed the remaining Borg ships and wiped out their base. With their immediate problem solved, the Romulan Star Empire agreed to attend the Federation's peace summit. After failing to assimilate Starbase 612, being held back by the Klingons, and losing Omega to the Romulans, the Borg needed a new strategy. It needed a singular representative, one mind to lead them more effectively than the cacophony of voices that comprised the hive mind. After realizing this, they located and assimilated a Dominion cloning facility, made a clone of Jean-Luc Picard, and assimilated him to recreate Locutus of Borg.
I will comply.
Under Locutus's direction, the Borg not only tracked down and assimilated the Romulan starbase housing the Omega molecule, but also learned of the peace talks being hosted by the Federation.
Such a union would jeopardize our plans to assimilate the Alpha Quadrant. Send a cube to capture the Federation ambassador.
With that information, the Borg intercepted and assimilated Ambassador Spock's ship, knowing that without him, there would be no peace between the Klingons and Romulans, forcing the Federation to face the Borg alone. With the Federation left vulnerable and without allies, the Borg launched a full assault on Earth. During the battle, which was going very poorly for Starfleet, Premonition was able to open a temporal rift to shortly before Ambassador Spock's ship was assimilated, allowing Enterprise to travel back to warn them and escort their convoy to the peace conference safely.
Commander Data, hail the convoy. Tell them to go to Red Alert and begin scanning the area for transwarp signatures. Inform Ambassador Spock that the Enterprise will personally escort him to the peace conference.
With negotiations successful this time around, a joint Klingon-Romulan fleet arrived at Earth to help repel the Borg. Knowing that the Borg had an Omega molecule, it was only a matter of time before they returned stronger than ever, so it was decided to take the fight to them. A combined Federation, Klingon, and Romulan fleet captured a Borg transwarp gateway, used it to travel to Unimatrix 01, deep inside Borg-controlled space in the Delta Quadrant, defeated Locutus, destroyed the Omega molecule, and managed to make it back through the gateway to the Alpha Quadrant. Upon returning and rendezvousing with USS Premonition, the Allied fleet suddenly vanished. Premonition's records showing that the Enterprise D had been destroyed over 11 years prior by an unknown vessel, killing Captain Picard, Lieutenant Worf, and Lieutenant Yar, and completely changing the timeline. Thanks to Premonition having a different quantum signature, because they're from the future, it was able to witness the changes in real time while being unaffected by them. Turns out that during the Battle of Unimatrix Zero, Locutus stole a page out of the Borg Queen's playbook. Moments before his cube was destroyed, a Borg sphere was launched and sent back in time to shortly after the Enterprise D's mission to Farpoint Station and destroy it. Captain Deming then ordered the Premonition to engage its own temporal drive so it could intercept and destroy that Borg sphere before it could destroy the Enterprise. Premonition then returned back to 2376 to confirm that the timeline had been restored, to the one that they altered in the first place, and then returned back home to their own time. I hope you don't mind that my summary of USS Premonition's lore ended up being more of a summary of the plot to Star Trek Armada, the video game that Premonition is originally from, but that's because Premonition wasn't actually featured that heavily in the game. Of Armada's 16 playable story missions, Premonition is only featured in, I think, 4 of them, and even then, it's not always a playable unit. Sometimes it's only featured in a cutscene, so there's a lot of unanswered questions about Premonition. But before I try to answer those questions, I want to go over the real-world history of Premonition first. This ship was made for the video game Star Trek Armada, which was released in February 29th of the year 2000, and was designed by James Maeda. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that right, so if I butchered it, I'm really sorry. Premonition wouldn't be used in any other licensed Star Trek media until July 25th, 2024, over 24 years later, when Star Trek Online released a revamped, modernized version of Premonition as part of its Heritage Starship bundle. This version of Premonition was redesigned by Eric Henry, with cleanup and finishing touches being done by Star Trek Online art director Thomas Maroney and Star Trek Online ship artist Keen Sin. The Star Trek Online model does take some creative liberties over the original Premonition design made for Star Trek Armada. Stowe's version streamlines the design a bit, slimming down the ship's profile and smoothing out the shapes of the saucer, secondary hull, and the temporal drive pod. I actually like the Star Trek Online version better because it does a great job of modernizing Premonition's design by not just making a higher detail model, but by paying small homages to other Federation ships that were designed around or a little bit after this era. The bridge section is made to more closely resemble that of the Sovereign class, elements of the main deflector and the warp nacelles were inspired by the Vesta class, and the hull material has that black on light gray color scheme that is very similar to that used on several Star Trek Online original designs, like the Odyssey class. Now, this isn't meant to knock on the original design. Premonition was just made 2.5 decades ago. Star Trek Voyager hadn't even finished then. Memory Alpha didn't even exist then. Star Trek Online's team just had the benefit of having a great deal more context and source material to pull inspiration from. Because, there's been a lot more Star Trek since the year 2000. Okay, now let's get into the fan theorizing. Now, just a heads up, I will be taking elements from canon and licensed beta canon into account during all this. Yes, a lot of this is stuff that wouldn't have been around when Premonition was first conceived, but I think the fun part of this kind of thing is trying to fit a ship like this into existing canon, even if canon was vastly different when the ship was first created. I think the biggest question around Premonition is probably its original time period. When is it from? Because it's never stated in Star Trek Armada. But based on what we see of the ship and its captain, it's likely not very far in the future from 2376. The first clue is Captain Deming's uniform. It's a first contact style uniform, just like the one Picard is wearing. which we know thanks to Star Trek Lower Decks is still in use in Starfleet at least through 2382. However, Deming's uniform does sport one difference: the color. His is gold, not the usual command red of this era. I can think of 3 possible explanations for this. 1, Captain Deming is actually a captain of engineering. We don't see this much in Star Trek, but Montgomery Scott was given this rank in Star Trek 3 when he was promoted and transferred to the Excelsior, and despite the fact that he technically sabotaged Excelsior, he still kept that rank throughout the rest of the movies.
Up your shaft.
So Captain Deming actually being a captain of engineering would explain his gold uniform, and could also indicate that he may have been the actual designer of Premonition itself, or at least had a hand in designing the ship. However, it is still odd for a captain of engineering to be given command of a starship, which leads to possible explanation number 2. Perhaps Captain Deming isn't the original captain of Premonition. Premonition was severely damaged when it arrived in 2376, and it was being attacked by 2 BORG ships. So it's possible that Deming was only in command of Premonition because everyone else that was higher in the ship's chain of command had been killed. Perhaps he was originally the chief engineer or chief of security. That would explain the gold uniform. This could also explain why Captain Deming always seems to take a backseat to Picard throughout Armada's story. I mean, if he lacks command experience, who better to follow than the
legendary Captain Picard?
Honestly, I don't think this really explains why Deming's uniform is gold instead of red, but I mean, there was a Borg invasion happening, maybe he just didn't have time to replicate a new uniform. With all that said, I think it's far more likely that this is merely just a design choice made by the Armada dev team. They were probably working with limited art assets and were on a budget, but wanted Deming's uniform to stand out somehow in comparison to Picard's. Since they would have no idea what a future Starfleet uniform would look like other than the All Good Things uniform, because, it was the year 2000, maybe they changed Deming's uniform to gold simply as an homage to the original series. Okay, I think that's enough overanalyzing of Thaddeus Deming. Let's move on to Premonition herself. The original model of Premonition from Star Trek Armada was often compared to the Sovereign class by fans. Both ships have a very similar shape, not counting the extra pod section that Premonition has, and Premonition also has very similar nacelles to the Sovereign class. So it's easy to presume that the Enterprise E played a strong part of the inspiration for this ship. And thanks to Star Trek Picard, we know that the Sovereign class was still in service at least through the early 25th century. Star Trek Online's version adds other small elements of the Sovereign class to the design, but also dips into elements of the Vesta class, which is another beta canon ship from the books. So, with all that in mind, this leads me to believe that Premonition is from some time within the span of 2380 to 2382. This is a period when the Sovereign class is still relevant enough that its technology would be used on other new ships, and also one where technology from the Vesta class is being utilized. According to the books, the first several Vesta class ships were operational by February of 2381, so that still fits within this small chunk of time. Now, Vesta is supposed to be an incredibly advanced ship by the time it's introduced, which makes sense because this is the first ship that was supposed to be using slipstream drive. But with the whole Borg invasion thing going on, it's possible that the Vesta class never came to fruition in Deming's timeline, but perhaps there was still technology that went into developing the class that would then be repurposed for Premonition. This is also a period when the First Contact uniforms are still being utilized by Starfleet, while the Odyssey class and other Star Trek Online originals would still be some years away, but giving Premonition that black on white hull material that's similar to the Odyssey class and other ships that are similar to it, pushes Premonition's design in that direction, giving you the idea that if you kept going down this timeline, eventually Starfleet ship design would approach something very similar to the Odyssey class, assuming everything wasn't assimilated first, which it probably would be, because there was an invasion. That was kind of the whole problem to begin with. Anyway, let's move on to the last big question about Premonition. Why? Temporal Prime Directive aside, why build a time ship when there are so many other ways to travel through time in the Star Trek universe? My guess would be a need for precision. The Borg invasion started with the assimilation of Starbase 612, so you'd want to send a ship back far enough to stop that, but not too far back to cause further contamination of the timeline. There are probably plenty of time travel methods that would have this sort of precision, but again, there was a Borg invasion. Who knows how many of these methods would have been available at the time? Ultimately, the real reason is kind of obvious. Star Trek Armada is a game about spaceships, so of course they would use a spaceship to travel through time. I think this is one of the reasons Premonition has fascinated me for so long, ever since I first played Star Trek Armada when I was 10 years old. There's so much mystery around the ship, despite it playing such a key role in the story. There's just enough to piece some things together, but so much of the ship's story is left unanswered, making it really interesting to explore. What do you think about the Premonition? Personally, I think it's a one-of-a-kind ship, one specifically built for the temporal drive, a last-ditch hope for a doomed Federation on the verge of being completely assimilated by the Borg. Upon completing their mission and returning to a changed timeline, Premonition was probably confiscated and quarantined by the Department of Temporal Investigations, and its crew probably reassigned all throughout Starfleet. Temporal Investigations probably had the ship decommissioned and scrapped, but I like to think that the ship is kept hidden away in some highly classified dry dock, just in case the ship is ever needed again. I hope you enjoyed this video. Premonition is an old favorite of mine, and it's been fun to re-explore its story while also trying to fill in some missing pieces with what we know about Star Trek's history nowadays. Let me know what you thought down below in the comments, and while you're down there, be sure to like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. If you'd like to further support the channel, hit the join button, or I think it's subscribe plus now. YouTube keeps changing it. Whatever they're calling it now, become a channel member to gain additional channel perks, or check out the merch store down below, or check out the affiliate links in the pinned comment. If you're ever shopping on the Epic Game Store, be sure to use my content creator code STU1701. Any of these really help me out, and I really do appreciate it. Either way, though, thank you so much for watching. My name's Stu, and I will see you guys next time.